This is Gemara Rosh HaShanah Daf Chof Tes as we move into the month of Kislev. With this learning of this week has been generously sponsored anonymously as a schus for Shlema for Pesha Bas Meira. Mir Hashem, the month of miracles, the month of Kislev, as Chanukah approaches, should bring a tremendous schus for Shlema for Pesha Bas Meira. The learning of the entire Chabura should be a tremendous schus for her refuah Shlema, as well as the schus of Chaim and the verse Shemirim Bas Yitzchak Gittel Shan Ezba Shan Malki Mordechai Bas Shendel as Gittel Bas Shendel, as well as schus for Shem Shel Yos Ben Yevedim V'Sichim Ben Sim Zelda Ben Vega Chaim Sasham Sim Reiz Azar Bas Gnendel. Either Basim as Chayisa is all in the lives of Shalasham as Nami Bashavir Shachanish Mobatila, Tinim Khanriz and Chaim as Vina Dinena Bashin Mendas Viva Hegron, Nicholas and the Huber Rivko as the Sheva, Naftali Sim Michalastar, Besaik Sha'ar, Chayle Yisrael. We are holding on Chav Chesam and Beis. We're approximately 8 lines from the bottom. First word of line is Hadar Mazeh Minei. We're at the brackets that says Mimai. We just finished bringing a raya that any time that you have the entire day to do something, and therefore it's all going to be included, and you could potentially be over in Baal Taisif. On that point, says the Gemara, Mimai, how do you know that the reason why that there's a problem with Baal Taisif in the case of the Bachar is the reason, like you just said, is because since you have the whole day, if another animal comes, the kind would have to do the Avaida, so seemingly he's included in the Baal Taisif. Says the Gemara, Dom Lukas of Rav Yeshua, Mitzvahs Iver Aleima Fil Shalai Bisman. Maybe Rav Yeshua holds, not like our entire discussion. We started all the way up top that you only could potentially be over Baal Taisif Bismanam while the time of the mitzvah. Remember that was the discussion Shmini Hatzeres, it's not the time of the mitzvah anymore. But says the Gemara, how do you know? Maybe Rav Yeshua disagrees with that premise. Says the Gemara, no way. Anan Achika Amrinan. This is the Raya. Rav Shemin bar Abba, my time was Shavik Mas Nisan Umoisimi Braisa. Why did Rav Shemin bar Abba not ask from the Mishnah, and rather he asked to Rabba from the Braisa? Loisimi Mas Nisan. He should ask from the Mishnah. That what? Mas Nisan my time. Excuse me. So now the Gemara explains. Mas Nisan my time. Why practicality did he not ask from the Mishnah? Kiman Ilu Misram Le Bukhra Achrina. Like we said, that since if another Bachar came to him, he would have to do the Hazah, the sprinkling the entire day. Therefore, Kuliyam is Manu. The entire day is considered its man. Bryce and Nami explains the Gemara. Now we're going back to the case of Duchening, Birchas, Koyahanim. Remember we discussed if a Kohen wants to add on another bracha, whether it's going to be considered Baal Taisif. So says the Gemara right now, in the case of Birchas Koyahanim, 6 lines from the bottom, Chav Chasam and Beis Nami, Kivan di Misrami, Sibura Achrina, on a critical line. Let's say another minion comes along, a Kohen's walking into a minion, and they're up to Shmaneh, say, he has to do the blessing, he has to say Birchas Koyahanim, therefore, the entire day is considered the Zman for Birchas Koyahanim. So says the Gemara, that's the reason. And now the Gemara continues and explains, Shaman bar Abba Asam Loisagid Loyaib Hachai by Mavarech by Mavarech. A fundamental difference, says the Gemara, between the case of Bachar and the case of Birchas Koyahanim. In the case of a Bachar, if an animal comes to the Kohen, he has no choice. He has to do the Avaida. Says the Gemara, by Birchas Koyahanim, he could choose Yibai Mavarech, Yibai Loy Mavarech. He does not have to say Birchas Koyahanim. We have to take a momentary pause for an incredibly important Taisus. Says Taisus on the bottom line, Mashma, what does our Gemara sound like? Mikan the kivan the Allah ledochen pamachas, once you dochen one time. Biyoim shov einoi over ba'asei. There's no more potential isur daraisa. Einoi over ba'asei. You're no longer over in the asei once you dochen one time. The Amar Lahem Kol Hayoim the Hakamar Yibai Eloi Mevarich. Says Tais is such an important line, and the Alach Lamaisa we don't have time to discuss right now. But Tais says our Gemara clearly holds that if you want the Duchen, you could. If you don't want to, you already Duchen once. The Din Daraisa for a Kohen to have to Duchen is only once. Says Taisus. Back to the Gemara. So what does Rava hold? Rava Amar 3 lines to the bottom. Lotzis Loi Bai Kavana Lavar Bai Kavana. Says Rava, to be Yotzei a mitzvah, you don't need Kavana. To be Yotzei without any intent. But to be over about Taisif, if you're potentially adding on, it only works if you have Kavana to do the mitzvah. Says the Gemara 1 second, but Matan Damin Rav Yeshua de La'avar. When it comes to Matan Damin of the Bachar, yet Rav Yeshua said he can be over v'loi by Kavana, even without intent. Elamarav, you're right, Nuvshat. Let's say loy by kavana. Lavar bizmanoi loy by kavana. If you're doing a mitzvah or you're potentially transgressing and adding on to a mitzvah in the right time, loy by kavana, and you automatically both fulfill the mitzvah and or over in Baal Taisef adding on to the mitzvah if it's the right time. However, says the Gemara, shaloy bizmanoi, that is when by kavana, that is when you have to have intent. Amar le Rav Zera l'shami. Rav Zera comes along and Rav Zera argues and everything that we said until now as we turn over to today's Daf Chavtasam and Half. Says Rav Zera, Ichavin v'tokalei. Says Rav Zera, when you're blowing shofar, have kavanah. And of course, that was the whole discussion. Now we got into this whole discussion of whether mitzvah tzrichas kavanah or not. Says Rav Zera, have kavanah to blow the shofar for me. Almo, what does Rav Zera hold? Because mashmiya boi kavanah. Rav Zera is of the opinion that mashmiya, the one causing the sound to be heard, the Baal Toikeah, the one blowing the shofar, he needs to have kavana. Meisvei asked the Gemara, is that true? Says all the cases we asked on Amid Beis. Someone's walking by a shul shay Beis, someone the Beis Knesset, your house is nearby, and you hear the sound of the shayfer, or call Megillah, or the sound of the Megillah. What do we say? Im kivein libai. Who is kivein libai? You, the listener. If you have intent, yatzim lav lo yatsa. Says the Gemara, kivein libai my habi. Who cares? You can have kavana from today to tomorrow, but hayech lo kamechavin adayta diday. Says the Gemara, what is going to help for you to have kavana? The other guy, the guy blowing the shofar, doesn't have you in mind. He has maybe in mind everyone in the shul, but you're not in the shul. So very good, you're walking by and you hear and you stop. And if kavana, I want to be out to the mitzvah. Who cares? The guy blowing the shofar doesn't have kavana for you. Rav Zera, you help the guy blowing the shofar needs kavana. Clearly we see not that way. Answers the Gemara, not like I said, it's not that his das is local onto who's in front of him. He's a shliach tzibur. He doesn't have das for this one, that one. It's for everyone, and that's the reason why it would work. Tashema, we try again. 8 lines from the top. Chavtasam and Half. Niskavin shaymeav l'niskavin mashmiya. Niskavin mashmiya l'niskavin shaymeav lo yatsa. Says the Brights, if either the guy listening or the blower has kavanah or not, you are not yoytze ad until sheyiskavin shaymeo mashmiya. They both have to have kavanah. Says the Gemara, katani mashmiya. It sounds like the mashmiya, the one blowing the shofar, has to have the same level kavanah as the one hearing the shofar. What does that mean? What's your kavanah when you hear the shofar that you're hearing from me? I'm being yoytze God's commandment. Sounds like mashmiya la'atzmai. He only has to have intent that he's blowing for the self. He does not have to have intent like Rav Zera said that he's blowing for everyone. V'katani. And yet, what do we say in the first case? Lo yatsa, you're not yaitse. So according to Rav Zera, of course you should yes be yaitse. Answers the Gemara, Tanoi, Rav Zera is in Machloikes Tanoim de Tanya, as we learned in Abraisa Shemea Latzim Hashmea Mashiach Levidarkai Amar Rav Yosef as Barmur Mashiach Sibra Vil Biyach Lo Yatse Shezkamin Shemea U Mashmia. The only way it's going to work is if both parties have kavana, and that's the end of this. It's actually obviously a much larger discussion about mitzvah srichas kavana or not. Just to mention one word, we paskin alach lamaisa mitzvahs daraisa. We need to have kavana, and if not, you're not yotzei. Based off of that, it's a very big problem. It would sound like if you didn't have kavana for tefillin, if you didn't have intent when you're saying Shema, those are mitzvahs deraisa. So it's important to mention the Mishabura Chayadim quote, this thing called Stamel Lishma. Why else are you putting black boxes on your arms? Why? What are you doing? There's a concept that even without kavanah, it's inherent. It must be what you're doing is for the sake of the mitzvah, and therefore, even on the deraisa level, that would work, which of course we hope is true. I mean, the Mishnah says it, so it's MS. But because we hold mitzvah srichas kavanah, of course, on a deraisa level, you should try. But just to realize, so we do not despair. Says the Mishnah Chavtasam and Aleph. Now, first we start off a bit of a continuation of the previous Gemara about having kavana. The pasuk says that Moshe Rabbeinu lift his hands, Yada b'gavar Yisrael Klal Yisrael would win. He says Melchama, Yishav is Melchama. Is it the hands of Moshe? He picks them up, they win. He puts them down, they lose. Picks them up, they win. What's going on? What is the teacher calls man? If you look up, you have kavana, you have intent. You know that Hashem is fighting for you. and you subjugate your heart to your Father in heaven, are you misgabrin v'imlav, are you neiflin? Similarly, the Sima Yisrael ate in the story by the Magifa, by the plague. They took a snake and they put it on a stick. Everyone looked up for the snake. And they lived. Is it this copper snake on the stick that causes one to die or be alive? That's when they're healed. But if not, they perish. And now the Mishnah goes into a new discussion. Who could potentially be yoyt to the mitzvah of shofar for you? Says the Mishnah, Cheresh Shoyta Vekatan, or at the end of the Mishnah of Chavtas and Aleph, Cheresh Shoyta Vekatan in Moitina Zarabin de Chavasa, and they cannot be yoyt the public their obligations. Zaklal, Koshe Einay Mechayiv B'Davar, because Cheresh Shoyta Vekatan, a deaf, mute, an imbecile, or a child, Einay Moitis Zarabim Yidei Chavasa. Says the Gemara. Let's go into the obligation who is obligated for shofar, who could blow shofar. Obviously, a continuation of the second part of the Mishnah. The first part of the Mishnah was a continuation of the previous Gemara. Interesting breakup, but let's continue. Everyone is obligated to blow the shofar. Kohanim, Leviim, Yisraelim, Gerim, Avodim, Mishacharim, V'tumtum, Androgenes. A Kohen, a Levi Yisrael, a convert, an Eved, a slave that is freed. Tumtum is someone who is not sure if he's a Zachar, a Kever, a male or a female, because his genitals are covered over. Vandrogenes is one, if it's a suffix, what exactly he is. Well, in the Gemara, we're going to discuss that there's a particular difference between the two. And Mishachati Avid Uchati Ben Chayrim. And someone who is a partial Avid, a partial free, is also obligated. Says the Brisa continuing, Tumtum, someone who is a Tumtum, someone who has his male member covered over, he cannot be Yotzei neither one of his type nor one not of his type. For the obvious reason, I shouldn't say, not for the obvious reason, excuse me. Let's let Rashi explain. The reason over here is, Rashi teaches us that a tumtum all the way up top, second narrow line, tumtum kemoisli shemata ke'azenikeva chavira zachar. The problem is that a tumtum has both zachar and a keva, and therefore he cannot be yotzei even himself, because maybe the other guy, again, we're not sure what he is. Let me say this clearly. We're not sure what he is. So if he blows for another tumtum, maybe he happens to be a zachar, and the other guy's in a keva, and therefore he cannot blow for him. And then similarly, back into the Gemara, it says, Androgenes, but androgenes is one, I think I said this wrong the first time, let's say it better this time. Androgenes is one that has, and androgenes is one that who is both. One more time, let's get our bearings straight. Androgenes has both male and female private parts, and a tumtum, it's covered over. So androgenes says both. The tumtum, we're not sure. So tumtum, we're not sure. Therefore, he can't be mighty anyone because we're not sure you as Zachar Nekeva, etc. And androgenes who has both, says the Brisa, mighty as mino yaveloy esheina mino. He can be his own type, who also has both, but cannot be his own else. Mishchati yavev v'chati ben chayrim ina mighty lois mino v'loy esheina mino, can't be anyone. End of Brisa. And now in classical Gemara sense, we're going to dissect the Brisa piece by piece. Amar Mar, says the Gemara, ha kol chayvim b'tkiyah shever karnel Israelim. Pshita, shkayach. Everyone's right in a mitzvah. Kain levim in Israelim. Obviously, it's a regular mitzvah. Explains the Gemara. Iani loy mechayev. Man mechayev. If these are not obligated, who is? Of course. Explains the Gemara. No, kahanim etzrichle, kahanim arachidish hakadet chamin. I would have thought. Hayaluk save yom turayil chamish be a day of shayfer, day of blowing for you. Man delesi elabet kia dechad yoimahu de mechayev. Only one who is within this parsha, within this category of someone who has a mitzvah for one day, he is obligated, and yet koyanim blow shofar all year long. So you would think they're not part of the mitzvah. Where do koyanim blow shofar all year long? It says in the you should blow trumpets for the carbon oil. So I would think maybe a kohen is not obligated. Why is a kohen not obligated potentially? Because he is not a yom true. Is that one day of blowing for a kohen? Every day is a day of blowing for a kohen. Kamash, when the Brisa said the kohen is obligated. Says the Gemara, 1 second. What are you doing? That pasuk said a kohen has to blow a trumpet a trumpet. We're discussing blowing shofar. What's the connection? It's for a different reason. It says in the Mishnah, Shava Yovel Rosh HaShanah Letzkiu LeBrachos. A Mishnah that we've seen quoted already, that Yovel is similar to Rosh HaShanah with regard to the mitzvah of blowing the shofar and the brachas. Man, the Isei b'mitzvah Yovel, Isei mitzvah Rosh HaShanah. So I would think whoever's included in Yovel is included in Rosh HaShanah. And the Kohanim, Ani Kohanim Yovel is Nayu b'mitzvah Yovel. Kohanim at some level are not part of Yovel, as we're about to see. With regard to the din that all ancestral fields go back to the owners of Yovel. If you don't redeem them within the requisite amount of time, you only get it back at Yovel. And that's not true. A kohen could always redeem his field that he sells. So they're not within the category of Yovel. So you would think they're not within the category of Rosh Hashanah. Therefore, it says the Braisa that a kohen is part of Rosh Hashanah. Now let's the Gemara develop itself. 2 lines from the wide lines. The Tanan we saw in a Mishnah. When they sell something, it's forever. They also can redeem it forever. So that is the Chiddush of the Braisa. And we continue with the next case of the Braisa. Someone who is part slave, part free, he cannot be Yotzei, one who is part a slave and one who is not a slave. What's the reason? Because, again, he's mixed up, so you have to have the same level of obligation to fulfill someone else's obligation. But he can blow shofar for himself. Why is he not allowed to blow for other people? Because the part of him that's an Eved can't blow shofar for someone else who's a free man. So says the Gemara, a fascinating question. The part of him that's an Eved shouldn't be able to be Yoitz, the part of him that's a free man. The same way he can't blow shofar for anyone else, he should not even be able to blow shofar for himself. Fascinating. You cannot even blow shofar, this half Eved, half free man for himself. 2 lines from the bottom. Approve. Cannot even be Yotzei himself. Says the Gemara. Let's continue in the obligation of shofar. Tani avu abreid Rav Zir kla bracha is kulan aval b'sheyata moitzi, a klal, a rule. All blessings, even if you already fulfilled your obligation, you're allowed to make a bracha for someone else. Chutz brachas lechem and brachas yayin. Excuse me. Except for brachas hananin, things that you have to get Hana from, as the bottom Rashi says, that you cannot make the bracha for someone else. Shem lo yoitzi mighty vim yatsa einay mighty. Meaning, if I'm having a cookie and I'm making mezainis, I could have you in mind. But if I'm not eating the cookie, I cannot make the mezainis for you. Brachas to have enjoyment, I cannot make for someone else. Says the Gemara by Rava, as we turn over to Chavtas Mid Beis, about to conclude this fabulous third parak. Says Rava, Brachas alachem shel matzah, Brachas ayayin shel kiddush. You just told me that when it comes to Hana, enjoyment, brachas, you cannot make for someone else unless you're doing it for yourself as well. But what about if there's also an element of mitzvah? Mitzvah of matzah, the mitzvah of kiddush. Says the Gemara, Kivan the chayvu mapik, since it's obligation of kiddush, obligation of matzah, maybe you could make it for someone else. Or maybe no, the mitzvah, the obligation is to eat the food, not to necessarily make the bracha. Says the Gemara, Tashema. Let's bring a proof. When I was by Rav Papa on Mekadesh Lon, he made Kiddush for us. When the sharecropper were coming from the field, who would make Kiddush again for them. So you see, even though Rav Papa made Kiddush, he still made Kiddush again for them. And that is a raya that by Kiddush you're allowed to make for someone else, even if you already were Yotzei. This is talking about Kiddush Friday night. This is not talking about Kiddush Shabbos Day, a discussion that we don't have time to have right now. Shabbos Day is just a different category. Let's leave it for now. Tana Rabbanan says the Gemara, lo yifras adam perusa le'archin. A person should not think of a piece of bread for his guests elim kein eichlima, unless you're eating with them. Avol payers lebanav lebnei beisai kedei lechanachan. You can give to your children in order to train them b'mitzvahs ubahalel ub'megillah afal pi sheyatza maitzi. Again, you could give it to your children for chinuch. Bahalel u'megillah afal pi sheyatza maitzi. You could be yoitzi someone else, even though you already fulfilled the obligation. Hadron halach ru bezdin. That was a quick parak we should do. a tremendous chazar of this parak. Just add on one word of this last din that we said, is that even though Hallel and Megillah are only midrabanan, still they're a chiyuv. And that's the reason why you're allowed to make the bracha for someone else. Mirta Hashem, we should do a fabulous chazara of this parak. And now let's at least, I know it is a bit late, but let's at least start to make a good dent into the fourth parak. Says the Mishnah, Yom Tov Rosh HaShanah Shechal Dias B'Shabbos. Rosh HaShanah falls on Shabbos. A lot of famous gemaras. Hopefully it'll go faster. Mikdash and the Beis HaMikdash are taking their blow shofar. Avalav Medina, not outside the Beis HaMikdash. Mishachara Beis HaMikdash is going to be Yechamin Zakei Sheyah taking b'chol makim do blow shofar everywhere. Sheish beBezin has a bezin. Amar Rav Elazar lo yiskim Yechamin Zakei. That's not what he did. Elo b'Yavne bilvad. He didn't say every bezdin, only Yavne. Amar Loi. They said back to Rav Elazar, Echad Yavne v'Echad kol makim Sheish beBezin. It's not true. Wherever there's bezin, he allowed them to blow shofar even after the destruction of the Beis HaMikdash. Void. Zayza Yushalayim is here al Yavne. Yushalayim is even greater. Shekol ir shiroya v'shaymas v'karayva v'yachadu lavai. Anyone who hears and sees and is able to come to Yushalayim, Toikin, they're allowed to blow shofar. Ubiyavna no lo. You're taking out bebezin bilvad. So the first part of the Mishnah is the more classical din. They blew shofar in the Beis HaMikdash, not outside. Then the Mishnah continues about an interesting takana of Yechamin ben Zakkai that he allowed them to blow shofar in places either with a bezdin or particularly Yavna. And then the Mishnah concludes that Yerushalayim is greater. The Yerushalayim you blow even if you're within the vicinity of Yerushalayim. Says the Gemara, Menani Mili, what is the reason we don't blow shofar in Shabbos? A very famous Gemara. One pasuk says Shabbos in Zichron Trua. This part's not famous. The famous part will come in a minute. Pasuk says Shabbos it should be a rest day, Zichron, the remembrance of the Trua. The day of Shofar. So what is it? Is it a day that you could do even overriding Shabbos or not? Says when it's a yontif that falls on a Shabbos, then you're not going to blow a shofar. Just going to be a remembrance of the shofar. When it's a yom that falls out during the week, you can actually blow the shofar. Amar Rava, says Rava, what are you talking about? Imidaraisi, you're learning it out from the Torah. That if you're telling me it's an Isser Daraisa not to blow shofar, a limit from the pasuk, then how in the Beis HaMikdash could they blow shofar? And furthermore, Halam Malachi, it's not a proper malacha, it's not a forbidden work to blow a shofar. The Itzrach Kralamuti that we should need a pasuk to forbid it. Titana Rav Dvei Shmuel learned Komlech Zavaida Loisasu. Yatzed excludes Kia Shaver Dias Habas, blowing the shaver thing over the bread. Shichach Mavena Malacha. So why would you need a pasuk to teach me this halacha about blowing shofar if it's not a proper malacha? It's a chachma, it's a wisdom. But you wouldn't need a proper pasuk. It should be a din derabanan. And therefore Rava doesn't like the fact that the Gemara of Chama Bar Chanina tried to learn it out from a pasuk. Rather, Rava comes along and Elamar Rava, and here's the famous line, Medaraisa Mishashari, really on a din daraisa, fascinating and fabulous. I'm sure everyone has heard. On Rosh HaShanah, on Shabbos, we should really blow shofar on a biblical level. Yet, Rabbanan knew the Gazer Bay. The Rabbanan made a Gezer Kidir Rabba, Damarabba. Hakol Chayavim B'tkiyah Shofar, V'nakol B'kiyim B'tkiyah Shofar. Not everyone knows how to, and therefore we are concerned. Gezer Shamilana B'yadav V'edach Chazabaki L'moid. You might take your shofar and carry to tell someone to teach you how to blow, and you'll come, and he might come to carry the shofar in Shusarabim, which is forbidden daraisa, and the lulav, and the Megillah. And of course, and absolutely incredible. We know the difference of Rosh HaShanah with the shofar and without is incredible. Yet, for one Jew potentially to be over an Isser, the entirety of Klal Yisrael will not blow shofar that year, and that is the explanation of Rabbah why we're not going to blow shofar on Shabbos. And then tomorrow we're going to stop over here, even though we have a few more lines, we're going to stop over here, and tomorrow we'll get into this Takana of Yochanan ben Zakkai, where he allowed them to blow shofar even outside the Beis HaMikdash. Was it only in Yavna? Anywhere where there's a Bezdin? We'll pick up from here tomorrow in Mirza Hashem.